Hey, all right, so I'm doing a video. Why you can't pitch without a public writing practice. Okay, so last week, right? Last week I was teaching in my class. I teach a class called Pitching Magazines with Confidence. I've been writing for magazines for a few years, and I decided to teach a class on the topic to be able to help other writers or business owners who want to be able to pitch magazines to be able to grow their social proof, to be able to get their bylines out there into the world. Right. So, and I noticed something in this particular class that I'm teaching with the ladies that I have in the class um, around the topic of developing ideas. It's not that they don't have good ideas, it's just that the pr- I take for granted the process of being able to sit down and actually being able to write articles and put it out there into the world. I take that process for granted because I've been writing for so long. And even before I started to write for magazines, like publicly, I had been writing for myself on a blog, or a on social media. Because if you're not really trained to sort of communicate um, consciously, if you're not trained to really communicate consciously or on purpose or with intention, then I can understand how, just sort of looking at this process as a beginner, that people don't really know. There's so many things that are sort of stopping people from just being able to go through the pitch process. What I'm finding is that it's easy for people to sort of learn the steps. They can sit through the steps with me, the steps make sense and all that other stuff. But if you're not used to actually speaking to a chosen audience on social media or your blog or a website of some kind or an email list, then you just sort of feel like you're sort of putting your ideas out there into the world. And so I just wanted to speak to that for a few minutes. So my name is Helena Black. I am a positioning specialist. I help mostly women, but some men too, with their positioning of their writing projects. So I work with people who want to write books, newsletters, um, books and newsletters, their social media, all sorts of things like that. Um, and so when I connect that to this topic that I'm talking about today, it's not that people don't have talent, or it's not even that they don't know how to write. It's not a matter of knowing how to write. It's knowing how to be able to interact with an audience, if that makes sense. Um, I find that so a lot of the people that come to me, they are comfortable with journaling, which is a private writing practice that I engage in often. I actually teach, journal writing and journaling as a meditation practice. And for things like self-awareness or just personal expression, things that are just sort of running amok in your head, and you need to be able to express it in a way that's safe and private to you. Journaling is excellent for that. Um, but if you are a person who has a business, if you are a person who just wants to be a writer in general, if you have any thought of one day publishing a book, you've really got to get used to being able to speak to an audience. Because what I'm finding is that um, people think that private writing is the same thing as writing to an audience, and it's two very different processes. Putting your ideas, your voice, and sometimes even your life story out into the open asks you to risk being rejected. It asks you to be open to other people's opinions sometimes. You can close off comments and things like that if you want to, but in general, you're sort of opening your brain to other people to be able to make comments, to judge. Um, to perhaps make assumptions that weren't even there to begin with. And that's a heavy responsibility. And that's something that I've had to learn over time. And I actually enjoy. I actually enjoy that process of being a writer. It's not just me being able to express what it is that I have to say. It's how does what it is that I am saying landing with the people that I am writing to, that I am writing for. Um, it's not always just my personal opinions that I'm writing about. Sometimes I might be writing something that where it might be sort of a collective consciousness kind of a thing, where I'm writing for myself, but also the expressing a public opinion of a group of people. Sometimes and of course I would say that while in the particular article that I'm writing. Um, But if you're not used to expressing your ideas publicly, again, it can feel heavy. It can feel emotionally loaded. Because now it's not just writing. You're exposing yourself. You're putting yourself out there to be vulnerable. You're putting yourself out there to be judged. And so, I've spent a number of years writing on the internet. Of course, now I write on Substack, which is sort of like a public online. It sort of acts as a blog. Well, now it's many things, but at its core, Substack is a public website, a public blog that asks other people to be able to leave space for people to be able to comment. And essentially, it is a community. Substack is a community of people who are also other writers. Um, don't necessarily need to be on Substack for people to be able to participate. But Substack is a community of writers within and of itself, a community of writers. And you can also, it's very easy for you to be able to share your Substack, your articles, your newsletters that you write, via email. So if you have an email list, you can invite them to participate in that way also. But I also write essays for other magazines. I write, of course, on social media. When I had Facebook, I used to put some effort sometimes when I had something in particular I wanted to say. I would express my thoughts about my life, particularly in the last 7 years that I've been living abroad, and how, just how living outside of the United States has really just sort of changed my life. And it really any public platform where anyone can read what I had to say. And over time, I just really learned how to become comfortable with something that many people avoid, which is I have learned to be seen in my thinking. Um, and I actually like that. As a person who is an introvert, I like to be able to, how can I say this? As an introvert, I really love the process of being able to sit down and sort of craft what it is that I'm thinking, and then putting it out there in the open for people to be able to think about, to see if it resonates. I'm less of a speaker. I'm learning how to be more comfortable through the process of doing these videos with you, through doing these videos on YouTube. I at least feel more natural in the process of doing somewhat of a regular YouTube video on a regular basis, than I did when I started. You can go, I've had YouTube videos up for years, but a consistent process, I think I've started in 2026. And so I am seeing how much more comfortable I am getting with, just sort of talking almost. I have notes when I do these things, but I don't necessarily like I don't script what it is that I'm saying. So I'm becoming more comfortable with being a public speaker. However, I'm a much more thoughtful writer than I am a public speaker. And so in teaching my class, in my pitching magazines with confidence class. One of the things that I have recommended to them was to start a public writing practice. So that for you, that could be a blog, Medium, a Medium site, a Substack. You can write articles or just post on LinkedIn, Facebook, or Threads. Threads is something that I think I want to start to explore, just to sort of see how conversations work there. You can use X or what used to be Twitter, but that's not really a space for me, I think, at this point. But Threads is. Threads seems to be interesting. And since I don't have access to my Facebook, at least at this time, hopefully before the year is over, somebody will be able to answer my questions. Um, but yeah, thoughtful posts on social media is a great way to be able to start your public writing practice. So just write about what you do. Pick something, that's you could, of course, if you have a business, you want to really write something that's related to your business, but you can also do things about, what is it that you're writing about? What is it that you're thinking about? What is it that you're experiencing? So when I started my public writing practice, my blogging practice, I started probably back in like 2004, 5-ish. And this was like in the really early days of blogging, right? And so everybody loved blogging back then, and it didn't matter. And I think I was living in Washington, D.C. at the time. So there were like clubs and groups and after work groups of people who were just bloggers in general who would come together to meet and talk about what they were doing and talking about what are the best practices in blogging. And then there were groups for people who were excited about a particular topic that they were blogging about. So it could be, social things happening in the world that they were blogging about. It could be about cooking, could be about barbecuing, could be about parenting. Mommy blogs were really popular, and I think still are really. People who were talking about getting married, all sorts of any and everything. I used to read a blog about people who were passionate about pens, like literal PENS pens, and just writing about the pens that they were excited about writing with in their journaling process, or they had pens for manifesting money. They would have a pen that they would write down their dreams with, and they would just like literally have a blog about pens. So it really didn't matter what it is that they were excited about. It's the point of you having a thing that you are excited about and sharing it with the world. And so what I used to do, I started off blogging about my work, of course. I was really excited about being in school and the work that I was doing in the community and in the adult education space. I used to teach adults how to read, write essays and things so that they can pass the GED. And of course, eventually, read things or write, job applications and resumes and things like that. And so I wrote about what I was learning in the process of, working with my clients versus what I was learning at the university. I was in a graduate school program. And so I would share my thoughts about that, which eventually led to me getting like consulting gigs and like short teaching gigs in certain places, teaching how to blog or um, consulting around adult education projects, doing grant writing and things like that. So that was really cool. I got to be able to write, and people were interested in what I had to say, and I actually got feedback by way of paid work by doing the public writing. Eventually, I grew out of love with that, and I grew into a space where I was learning about health and well-being. And I started a personal health blog. I had fibroids at the time, and I wanted to find ways to be able to get rid of them naturally which this was probably back in like 2009, 2010. And so there really wasn't a lot of information about fibroids on the internet, at least not from a patient standpoint. Nowadays in 2025, fibroid information is all over social media. But back then there really wasn't. And so I was blogging about my experience with learning how to cook. I had even written a book, which actually is still available on YouTube and still sells to this day, which is crazy to me. I had written a short book about what I was doing with fibroids. And yeah, I was cooking stuff, learning how to like make pancakes from scratch instead of using a box of Bisquick. Um, and I was having a really fun time. And that process has really informed what I do today, just learning how to be able to gather an audience. I would write things that I was excited about, and when I posted an article on my blog, what I would do is I would go to Facebook, I'd say, hey, I have a new post, put up a picture about it and everything. And I say, hey, if you want to be able to read this, you can go to this link. And I would really appreciate it if you left me a comment, which people did over time. And over time, over a few years that I was doing the blog, um, I actually gathered up a few thousand people on my email list from literally all over the world. And so I was having conversations with women in Kenya, Iran, Nigeria, Jamaica, of course, all over the United States, people in Europe, literally everywhere. And it was just really nice. It was fun to be able to get feedback on the thing that I was excited about and really to be able to create a community with other women who were experiencing the very same thing that I was going through, and to be able to share what's working for me. And sometimes in the comments, other women were also sharing some of the conversations that they were having in their part of the world, right? So what I learned was that you write something, you share it, you tell people where to find it, you invite them to read it, leave the comments on. Like if you can. Like if you're gonna be so bothered by the comments, then certainly could just cut it off. But if you can do it, I would say to leave the comments on just to see what sort of feedback you get. More times than not, you will get positive feedback, but just leave yourself open to it. Just get used to having your voice be out there in the world. Get used to having your voice, your written voice. This is your curated voice, live outside of you. All right. So I also wanted to share 5 things that I kind of learned in this process about writing in public that sort of makes the pitching process easier. Is that number one, you stop waiting on permission. When you write publicly, you're no longer waiting for someone to choose you and your ideas. You're not waiting for someone to tell you that this is a good idea. You get to decide what's important for you to be able to write about. Because I think if you're not a regular writer, then what we're used to is we sit and, we wait for a teacher to give us an assignment when we were in school. We only wrote when it was time for us to write an assignment. And what was important for you to write was what the teacher told you was important to write about. But when you're writing publicly in a blog, your Substack, your email list or whatever, you get to decide what's important. Or you get to decide what it is that your customers think is important. Or, just your general readers if you're not necessarily selling anything. And so you learn to stop waiting on permission on what to write about. You get to move forward with what your ideas are. And that really is an empowering process for you as a communicator, as a writer. You get really excited about saying, you know what, this is important to me. There's got to be other people out here who feel the same, or who, maybe they don't feel the same. They want to have a discussion about it. But that process is empowering, at least to me. So you don't have to wait for permission. in this process of public writing. Number two is that you learn how to be able to complete an idea. So a lot of us have thoughts that, that we're thinking about, but writing publicly forces you to take that whole idea head on. What's the beginning, the middle, and the end of this particular thought? And that's exactly what writing a pitch requires. You know, I have a thing in my class that I'm teaching about writing for magazines with confidence, is that there's a difference between writing a topic. A lot of people say, well, I like writing about women's issues, or, I like writing about food. Um, or, I'm a mom, and so I really like writing about how it is that I raise my kids. And all of those things are wonderful. That's really interesting. But you can't go and pitch an article based on the topic that you want, because everybody wants to write those topics. What editors actually value at magazines is your ability to be able to create an angle for the exact story that you want to pitch, right? And so creating an angle for the story that you want to pitch is really important. And so, an angle can turn from I want to write about food to, writing a particular, pitching a particular story about, I don't know, uh, the Black food, the Black owned restaurants who appeared um, at a particular food festival, and what were some of the, um, I don't know, what were some of the ingredients from the continent of Africa that they all featured in the food that they featured at this particular festival. You see how that's a lot more condensed, that's a lot more particular, that's a lot more interesting than just saying, I want to write about food. You need to be able to come up with an angle for the stories that you want to be able to pitch. So that's a little bit of what it is that I pitch that I share in the class of teaching people how to write for magazines. Um, Something else I learned, I developed in the process of my own public writing process. This is before I was pitching magazines. I learned how to develop my voice through blogging. So I get to gain an appreciation for the way my brain works, how I think, how it is that I explain things. Um, and just sort of noticing what it is that's important to me versus um, what may not be publicly expressed by others in the general public. And so you start to develop a clearer voice over time. And of course, as I've gotten older and have become more confident in who I am and what my opinions are, that voice just becomes, it's a more empowered voice, it's a more confident voice, and that's really what you want. You want to develop your writing voice. And so blogging has really done that for me. Um, you also build evidence of how your thinking transitions over time. As you learn and you grow and you learn new things, your opinions and your thoughts are going to become bigger. Some things you're gonna go back on, one day you may agree with one thing, and 10 years later, you may have had different experiences and you think differently. Um, so you want to be able to have evidence of how your thinking grows at times. Um, but here's the thing. When you build an evidence of your thinking and you pitch editors and they want to know whether or not you can actually write an article, um, when you have published pieces, even if it's just for your own blog, I'm not even talking about having written for other people before, but you need to have proof. You need to have evidence that you know how to write an article from start to finish. And so having that online um, actually support you in the process of writing for magazines. And last but not least, number five, just my public writing practice has really helped me to become less afraid of being seen. And this is probably the most important one because the more you share your ideas publicly, the less the less power rejection has over you and your thoughts. And really, that's really the thing. You know, a lot of people, myself included, when I started pitching magazines, I was so afraid of being rejected, of having my ideas rejected, until I got to the point where I realized that when you don't pitch, you're rejecting yourself anyway. You know, you reject yourself before you have an opportunity to actually um, share your thoughts. So you want to be able to go ahead and just become comfortable with sharing your ideas through your own public writing process, which you can do again through a blog, Substack, Medium, LinkedIn articles, LinkedIn posts, Facebook posts, thread posts, somewhere where you can gain evidence of you being a thinker. So that's what I have for today. If you want to um, keep up with what I'm doing, you can sign up for my email list. Go to halanablack.kit.com. Um, the link will be in the description box. What am I doing right now? I'm doing 20-minute strategic clarity calls with people. I'm taking on people who are, number one, if you have a business and you are looking to hire a newsletter ghostwriter. That is not a cheap process. Let me be clear. But if you have a business that is successful already and you're looking for someone to help you keep your voice out there in the public, we may be a match. Also, I am doing sessions with people who want to be able to write books. So I do strategic sessions with people who are interested in writing a book, and we come up with what I call like a nonfiction book proposal. And we write that so that at the end of that, of the sessions that we do for the nonfiction book, you can actually take that and you can write the book yourself. And then some people decide to sort of use that as a stepping stone before we actually go into the 3-month process of actually writing the book together. You write the book, and then I work as the developmental editor to help guide you through the process so that you're just not waiting around out here for the next 3 years trying to finish a book, and you can actually finish the book in 3 to 6 months. So that's what I have. halanablack.kit.com. I will see you tomorrow in the next video.